This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning and welcome to Early Start, everyone. I'm John Berman.
And good morning, I'm Brooke Baldwin. Soledad O'Brien off this week here on Starting Point, beginning with the breaking news.
The latest on the stunning death of the U.S. ambassador to Libya. Anti-American sentiment on the rise in Benghazi, where a rocket attack has taken the life of Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens and 3 other members of the U.S. Embassy staff. The group was in their car heading apparently to a safer location after protesters had raided the U.S. consulate there.
The anger against the U.S. stemming from this amateur online film produced in America that has offended millions of Muslims. We're covering the story from all angles across the globe for you in the way that CNN can. We have Jamie Rubin sitting here in the studio, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Roland Martin, CNN political analyst, Leslie Jane Seymour, editor-in-chief of More Magazine. Welcome to both of you. And Will Kane, columnist for TheBlaze.com. And in addition to everyone sitting at the table, we have from Washington, D.C., Tori Clark, a former Pentagon spokeswoman and a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. And Tori, let's just begin with you. And if I may, we've just received this statement. Once the White House confirmed the death of Ambassador Stevens, we now have the statement from Hillary Clinton in which not only does she, of course, express profound sadness over his death, but she mentions, this is the first time we've heard of this name, Sean Smith. Can you tell us who Sean Smith is?
I don't know Sean Smith personally, but I know there are just scores and scores of people, Jamie Rubin knows this, who work at our embassies, who work for us overseas and do such an incredible job. And I know there's so many things you want to talk about this morning, but my heart is just breaking for the families of these people, for the ambassador, for Sean Smith, for the others whose names we'll learn. They make so many sacrifices, they work so hard, and I just can't imagine what their families are going through right now, and I just give them my thoughts and prayers.
Absolutely, and I can just sort of fill in the blanks here as I'm looking at the statement from your boss, from Secretary Clinton. She says Sean Smith, he was a Foreign Service Information Management Officer. This statement also goes on to say they're still making next of kin notifications for the other 2 individuals. Our hearts go out to all their families and colleagues. Sean Smith, a husband and a father of 2.
Hey, Tori, it's John Berman here.
Hey, John.
You worked through so many difficult periods during the Bush administration. How does a White House, how does an administration have to react like a tragedy like this? What are the delicate matters they have to deal with now?
I think delicate's a really good word, John, and as much as you want to give people information, you want to tell them here's what's happened, here's what's going on, you have to try to be very careful. You've heard it 1,000 times. First reports are always wrong. I think as this day goes on, we'll learn more about what happened in these 2 different places. But the first thing you do is try to get as much information as possible. You try to make very sure that the rest of our people who are working around the world are safe. Do we have procedures in place? Are we aware of any other attacks that are underway? I listened to Peter Brooks this morning. I just have to echo what I heard him say. It seems like such a coincidence that these 2 protests that were going on in 2 different places happening at the same time. We had a heads up they were happening. It happened on 9/11. To me, it sounds like there was more planning than just a random mob. So you have to look at why did this happen. And then I think it is very, very important for our government, for our senior officials to be making strong statements, condemning the violence, urging the Libyan government and the Egyptian government to get to the bottom of this and make sure the people who did this are brought to justice.
Speaking of condemning the violence, there has been a news conference that's been going on in Libya, and I just want to play a little sound. We're going to hear from the head of the ruling party condemning what's happened. Take a listen.
We also reject and condemn and strongly criticize the use of force and terrorizing civilians, killing innocents as a means of expression.
So, public condemnation from Libya as far as what's happened. We were just talking to our reporter in Cairo, some statements from the foreign ministry, yet nothing from Mohamed Morsi. This truly, Tori, is a test for him and his new leadership over a good friend of ours being Egypt.
I agree with you completely, and not that they're asking for my advice, but I think he should be at that podium, and not that President Obama is asking for my advice, but I think Secretary Clinton has put out very careful, very appropriate statements. I think it's time for President Obama to be at a podium saying exactly those things. We condemn this violence. Stupid movie, whatever the significance of that is, which is minimal, nobody should do what these people did in Libya and Egypt. And I think the president should be saying that very forcefully as well.
Tori, give me the sense of how you think things are going in general, in Libya, in Cairo, in Syria. Where is the U.S. right now in terms of its foreign policy in the Arab region?
It's a great question, John. And even if this hadn't happened the last couple of days, if we were having a conversation about the election year, I would say one of the things that is really missing is a serious and sober conversation about where are we in these incredibly dangerous parts of the world? What is the U.S. policy there? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we on that road of progress? How are we doing? Are we on the right track? I honestly don't know what it is we're trying to accomplish. I hear that we're trying to help them set up democratic forms of government. Great. How are we doing that? I think there's a bit of, maybe there are plenty of things going on in the ground and things going on behind the scenes, but I think we need a very, very strong and clear discussion of what it is we're trying to accomplish there, and then maybe we could better assess how we're doing. Right now it looks very uncertain, it looks very dangerous, it looks like there's a vacuum of leadership, and I think vacuums of leadership from both sides can be very provocative.
Let me also jump in, Tori, because we're also learning as this Libyan news conference is going on that the Libyans have also gone on to apologize to the United States, to the Americans, to our government, and to the rest of the world. Let me just turn this to Jamie Rubin, because I'm curious, Jamie, these are words, and while we appreciate these forceful words condemning the attacks, is that enough?
Well, no, it isn't enough. Look, Ambassador Stephens was obviously a friend of the Libyan government, and they saw him as a friend. He had worked in Benghazi during the rebellion. They had a special feeling for him. They're feeling particularly bad right now, the Libyans, that their closest ally in the U.S. government system was killed by Libyans. So they've said the right things, but now they need to do the right things. And by do the right things, I mean try to assess the facts here in a serious way, by determining to what extent these events are connected, to what extent this was a planned assassination or the result of violence at the consulate, to what extent this is all connected to a larger Islamic extremist attempt to exploit the event, the date 9/11. Those are facts none of us know right now, and we'll know them quicker if the Libyan government starts to do the hard work of taking this event as seriously as they should. And frankly, I think they will, because they really know this is their closest friend in the U.S. government, and they've needed help from the United States since they won their freedom.
Roland, I want to bring you in here, Roland Martin, because I could see your face when Tori Clark was talking about U.S. foreign policy in the Arab region, and she used the word vacuum of leadership.
Yeah, because it's interesting. We've heard Senator John McCain and others say we need to be more aggressive when it comes to Syria. But this is exactly part of the problem when we can be very active on the front end, toppling a government, but absolutely the follow-up. I remember the late Congressman Charlie Wilson, we talked about Afghanistan. Once we moved folks out the first time, he said, now what are we going to do? We naturally always want to then pull out and say, well, it's somebody else's problem. And I think it's important for the American consumer also to say, what more do you want to see us do? And then all of a sudden we get upset when this happens. I mean, we have to recognize this. This is a collective issue here. So I take issue with her saying that.
All right, Roland, I want to thank Tori Clark, by the way, in Washington right now. Thank you, Roland. We want to bring you some breaking news from the Pentagon right now. Marine reinforcements are heading to Benghazi right now. So let's bring in Barbara Starr, who is at the Pentagon with this news. Barbara.
John, 2 U.S. officials are now confirming to us that Marines are on their way to Benghazi. This will be a anti-terrorism security team, a FAST team is what they are called. They are going to Benghazi to reinforce the consulate there, to reinforce the U.S. diplomatic installation there. You saw that Secretary of State Clinton has asked for additional security. The president has said there will be additional security at U.S. installations around the world. And after what has happened at Benghazi, Marines now on the way. These are the very specific Marine Corps embassy teams that are structured just for this job, to reinforce an embassy or a diplomatic installation when violence breaks out. As you know, Marines guard embassies around the world. This is more people, more firepower, more security capability. But John, in Libya, Cairo, at installations around the world, one of the key issues is that U.S. jurisdiction, of course, only extends to the fence line. When the violence breaks out on the street, it is the responsibility, of course, of the host government to maintain security on behalf of the U.S. Embassy. These Marines will be inside the installation. They will guard it. They will provide security for the U.S. Personnel who work there. We will begin to see them arriving on the ground, and I think there's every indication we will see more military security movements given the President and Secretary Clinton's orders for more security at diplomatic installations, John.
Barbara, in Cairo yesterday and in Benghazi, it did seem as if the protesters did get over the walls, though, of the consulate in Benghazi and the embassy in Cairo.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is why you are seeing this movement of more muscle power. If they, it's a very specific thing. On the street, it is the host country's responsibility. Once they climb the fence line, if you will, once they climb the embassy fence, then it is security inside the embassy, but it is still the responsibility of the host government to make sure it doesn't get to that point. I think that you will see the U.S. administration is very concerned that these governments maintain their responsibility for security on the street, and it does not get to that point. This is why, however, it is. So this is why you are seeing this reinforcement of embassy security being ordered. You are going to see Marines moving in. You are going to see them taking a very assertive posture. Look, they are not looking to shoot anybody. They're not looking to get into a shooting war, but they are under orders. It is very clear to maintain security at U.S. diplomatic installations, and they will have the rules of engagement, if you will, to be able to do that. But it's only going to work, according to U.S. officials, if the host governments step up their responsibility as well. Let me add one more thing, John. We are told that we should expect to see perhaps some U.S. military aircraft moving into Libya to begin to take care of any medical evacuation or removal of remains of U.S. diplomatic personnel, perhaps including the ambassador, John.
All right, Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thanks very much. A lot of news right there. U.S. military aircraft perhaps patrolling Libya to help with medical personnel. U.S. Marines headed to help with embassy security. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thanks very much.
So as more firepower is headed to Libya, I want to stay in Libya because we're going to talk to Jomana Kardashian. She is on the phone with us live from Tripoli. And Jomana, tell us a little bit more about what was said in that Libya news conference. Perhaps it's still going on as the head of the ruling party in Libya is basically apologizing to the American people.
Yes, indeed. The Libyan Prime Minister and the Speaker of the Libyan Parliament, the National Congress, extending their condolences to the United States, its people, and to the family of those killed. According to the Speaker of the Parliament, it was Ambassador Stephens who was killed in the along with three other people in the consulate. Now, it is not clear what happened. The officials said that an investigation is underway, and they refuse to go into the details of this attack and how it happened. They are blaming this attack. At one point, they blamed it on Gaddafi loyalists. And at another instance, they hinted that it was Islamist extremist groups that we know are operating in eastern Libya. The Speaker of the Parliament saying that there was a clear indication here that this coincided with September 11th, and saying that they completely reject the use of Libya and its land for any sort of revenge attacks. They have promised to secure all foreign nationals here, foreign missions, but they said they were already doing everything they can to secure it. And in this instance, as we have seen, they have failed to do so, underscoring the fragility of the security situation here, Libya being a country that is awash with weapons, with hundreds of militias operating here, including those in the eastern part of the country. As we've heard from Western intelligence agencies in recent months, groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda who have been operating in that area. We have seen these groups, an umbrella group known as Ansar al-Sharia, in the past claiming responsibility for attacks against Western targets, including the U.S. consulate back in June when a bomb exploded outside this very building.
Jumana Kardashaw on the phone with us from the capital city of Libya. Jumana, thank you very much here. And as we continue to cover this story, I just wanted to open this up to the panel. We have Jamie Rubin at the table. Our panel, Will Kane, jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jamie a question, return to something both you and Tori Clark mentioned. We know a couple things. We know this took place on 9/11. We know that this offensive movie that supposedly is the catalyst for these protests came out months ago, I believe, on YouTube, sometime in June, July. Tori Clark mentioned that she sees it as an incredible coincidence, and you said we should look into how planned this is. That's a surprise to me. Does this look like something to you that is not a natural kind of grassroots protest, but it's actually planned and coordinated behind the scenes?
Well, it is look a little bit that way, because think about it. The last time this terrible pastor in Florida, this guy who seems to enjoy burning Korans and stirring up trouble, got involved. Thank you for the name. It was Afghanistan and Pakistan that had the connection. And so clearly there were people in those two countries who reacted to just the idea of the burning of the Quran. And what I'm guessing happened is that behind the scenes, Islamist extremists probably heard about this event and are looking to create a name for themselves, looking to create an event. And so they find what they can. They distribute information that's now this film has been, broadcast on parts of Egyptian television, and stir it up by disseminating the fact of this film. And so then that is still, we don't know that that's violent yet. That is public protest at stage one. And where this is particularly unusual, and why this investigation is so crucial, is the attack on the American ambassador with an RPG looks like an assassination.
During his escape from the embassy.
And so what the connection between those two things I just described is the essence of whether these are larger forces at work, whether these are just the fact that Libya and Egypt are no longer under control of security apparatuses the way they were under Mubarak and Gaddafi, or whether there is some larger goal and some group and a conspiracy, essentially.
So I have a question for you, too. Is this just a clash between people who are very comfortable with open news systems being completely connected and people who don't know how to do that today? And we can't put a stop on that. I mean, the whole world is connected. These things get out there.
Well, finding this balance, and you can see it's already causing some political problems at home, finding the balance between defending free speech and condemning particularly hateful speech. We know there are limits to free speech, the classic being you can't yell fire in a movie theater. So figuring out how hateful speech is treated by our government so that people around the world don't see in an unsophisticated way something coming out in America and thinking, well, the U.S. government could have stopped that, when we can't stop that. And so therefore the only antidote is to make clear that we condemn hateful speech while recognizing the right to free speech. We can defend somebody's right to speak and still hate what he says. And that subtlety is tricky in the modern world.
I have to ask you about retaliation, obviously, because Americans are sitting out there and saying, how do we respond? And so I want you to speak to that, but also as a former State Department official, how do you also deal with the balance of trying to support very fragile governments and folks who we said, we have your back when it comes to democracy as well? That's very fragile.
I don't think unless we find the individual cell responsible for assassinating the ambassador. If we do find them, they should either be brought to justice in a criminal sense, or there should be military action of some kind, perhaps special forces tracking them down. They've killed the representative individual of our country. This is a serious thing. It hasn't happened, I think we were talking earlier, since the late 70s, where a U.S. ambassador has been killed in the line of duty.
This is a very hostile act.
This is a very hostile act. So some response of a significant nature is absolutely required. But you were talking earlier, and I think we all know the truth, and I think you were talking, Libya was a big deal in this country. We all spent a lot of time talking about it. It was nonstop coverage. We were all very proud of the end of the Gaddafi regime, a hateful dictator who had killed Americans in the Lockerbie bombing, who was about to slaughter his own people. And the United States, along with Britain and France, helped the Libyan rebels overthrow him. We didn't do it for them, but we helped them. And then, as it is in this country, we turned the channel. We switched the lens. We stopped paying attention. And when we engage ourselves militarily, and there are fundamental changes in regimes around the world, I believe we have a responsibility to see it through, and that costs money.
But wasn't
it
that
costs
precisely
time.
When Ambassador Stevens was there in Tripoli
Exactly,
trying to do?
but I can assure you that he was having a tough time getting the attention of our political system for providing the funds, the energy, the focus, and the attention that they needed, because it really wasn't so much money. Libya is an oil-rich country, but they needed help at a fundamental level from all over the world. They had no government system other than the dictatorship of Gaddafi, and suddenly they were free, and that is why they're so unstable that people can run around targeting the American ambassador, even though the government apologizes.
And let me just broaden this conversation out, and I want to bring in Elise Labott, who has incredible sources with the State Department. And Elise, as we continue to talk about Ambassador Stevens, let's also remember that there were 3 other workers with him in this car.
2 Marines, yeah.
Right, who were killed. We have the statement, I know you have the statement from Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Tell me a little bit more about, we have another name, Sean Smith. Who was Sean Smith?
Well, Sean Smith was a Foreign Service officer at the State Department. I didn't know him as well as I knew Chris Stevens. But, Brooke, I mean, Secretary Clinton often says that diplomats are on the front lines of U.S. foreign diplomacy. And as in this case, really, these type of people, these people that go to Libya, that go to Iraq, Afghanistan, these are people that, you know, a lot of people now in today's Foreign Service don't necessarily want to be pinstripe diplomats, as Jamie well knows. They want to go out in the field. They want to be working with the people, trying to, even if it means putting themselves in harm's way, it means getting their hands dirty and working on doing the hard slog of trying to build these institutions, trying to work with people on the ground. And these diplomats were not just people that sat in their ivory tower in the embassy or the consulate. They were out in the field working with various groups, working with tribes, working with all of the people in the Libyan government and in the U.S. government to try and get this country back on its feet and start anew.
Do we know, Elise, and forgive me for a bit of a morbid question at this early hour, but I mean, from what we know, Ambassador Stevens and these 3 other workers are still in Libya, correct? I mean, how does the U.S. then remove them so we can bring them home and honor them amid the violence there?
Well, we understand from one of our contractors on the ground that the bodies are being brought to the airport in Benghazi. Ultimately, they'll be flown home for proper burial by their families, and certainly there'll be ceremonies and memorials to mark their work at the State Department. There's a wall on the headquarters of the State Department here in Washington. It's called Foggy Bottom headquarters. There's a wall of all the Foreign Service officers killed in action. And unfortunately, in the last several years, particularly since 9/11, that has grown considerably, that wall. And those names will be on there. There'll be some kind of ceremony. But getting the bodies home, getting their remains to their families and their personal effects to their families, and really helping the families through this time will be a priority. And as we've been talking about, also trying to secure other U.S. personnel, not just in Libya, but in the region.
Right, as we learned from Barbara Starr, more reinforcements moving in.
We're covering the death, the killing of Ambassador Chris Stevens in Libya by a rocket attack, apparently, along with 4 other members of the U.S. mission there. We will have more details on this on CNN as only we can cover it. Stay with us.